Okay. Let's start with the opening sutra. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma, it is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understandings of the teaching and practice, it's done so as a practice of dana paramita. And dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely. And this is done so without expectation or judgment when the opportunity arises. And those who share their teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis, and please support their practice if you can. And our speaker today has asked that her dana go to Great Tree. So you can go to our new and improved website and click the donate button on the upper right corner. Our speaker today is Dr. Liliane Myoren Papin. She is a Franco-American writer and teacher of Chinese medicine, which she describes as an ecological medicine particularly suited to our times. She practices and teaches acupuncture, herbology, qigong, and dietary therapy. Her books are The Treasures of Chinese Medicines for Today's World, The Great Book of Daoist Medicine, Immunite Special Edition, and recently, Dare Sea Vegetables, Therapeutic and Culinary Uses of Sea Vegetables, with the co-author of her husband, Didier. Welcome, Liliane.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you. It seems like it's very cold in Asheville from what I've read. And yeah, I see Stella is all cocooned. Here is very gray, very gray. So today the topic of my little talk is about winter, salt, and kidney. So it's still part of the 5 energies and following the seasons, like Tejo had asked me to do. And so I like to explore different aspects of that. So just as a reminder, could I be made co-host so that I can share a document for a moment?
Yes. Hold on just a second. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So, all right. Okay, so I think you can see it. Okay. So just as a little reminder, in the seasons right now, we are here. Although we have a bit of this coming up, meaning we are beginning the Chinese New Year, which is a lunar calendar, and in that lunar calendar, spring has already begun. And although it might not be obvious, but a lot is going on underneath the soil. And here, even though it's been pretty cold, and I saw in our garden that we have a little cherry tree. And indeed, if you look, you can see the beginning, the beginning of what you call that, not the seeds, but, buds, thank you. And they're, they're already there. So basically the lunar calendar is registering those deep movements underneath. So spring is already here in its movement, but in this, and in the solar calendar, we are in the winter energy, which is what is happening now, the cold. And so there's some teachings about both, meaning, we can start including some foods for example, that are good for the liver and the spring. And here is kidney energy, and that's also what we need to reinforce right now in order to have a good spring. So we are here in the winter energy. And what that means in Taoism, because these five energies are very old, and they, at least 5,000 years old, and possibly older than that. So it corresponds to the season of winter. It corresponds to water energy. So in your mind, translate those images, because they are really categories. So when we say water energy, it's like water is the most obvious example of that energy. But and again, not but, it really means fluids. So oil, for example, would be there as well. It's the energy of fluid, everything that flows. Then we have, it corresponds to night or the late evening, the color. So these are all vibrations, because otherwise it's like, well, that seems a bit arbitrary. But really, when you look at it very closely, you see that we're talking about energies and vibrations. So in terms of color, it corresponds to night, dark blue and black, like the ocean, deep ocean, when the light cannot reach anymore. It corresponds also to cold. That's important, of course, cold because it's winter, and meaning that our kidneys are naturally cold, and um, they refresh, with water. Water is cooling unless you transform it, it's cooling. So kidneys have that energy. And so in Qigong, for example, we work a lot with the fact that kidneys need to be warmed up in order not to freeze. Because they are already cold or cool, they're very sensitive to cold. That means it's easy to get lumbago, or, to get lower back pain, especially in the winter, because, it's just like fire energy. The energy of the heart has very little leeway in terms of bearing heat. Too much heat is going to hurt the heart, which is fire energy. So every time an organ has a specific energy, it also means it's particularly sensitive to that energy. So our bodies in the winter they need the cold in many ways, and they're very sensitive to cold, meaning the challenge for us is to manage that cold. It corresponds also to the deep structure of the body, meaning bones, our skeleton, our spine. It also corresponds to what is called in Taoism prenatal energy, which we could translate with DNA, although DNA is I think, is smaller than prenatal energy. Prenatal energy means also, for example, that what is inherited from previous generations is also the emotional karma, and I don't know if you have noticed that, but I think it's when I talk to patients, or it's pretty obvious that the traumas of past generations continue, including in the culture. Like, for example, we were talking about not long ago, Didier was reading a book about the secession war in the United States. And as he was reading some passages, he could not help but see how really that energy of that war is still very much present in the US, between the North and the South, and some of the deep divisions that still exist. And so it's true culturally, it is true also in our makeup. So one way of looking at it too is that what we carry in our prenatal energy, only the heart can transform, meaning it has to become conscious. As long as it's unconscious, it continues to rule and be acted out. Only through consciousness can it be transformed. And in that sense, and Thich Nhat Hanh, actually, I was pretty amazed one day because I listened to one of his talks, and really it was so Taoist in its understanding, meaning he talked about how our ancestors are walking with us and how we can continue to heal, meaning that relationships do not end at death. We continue to carry that prenatal energy, and we can heal our ancestors and future generations. So that energy, that prenatal energy, on a very basic level, indeed, it's DNA, we could say. It's the fact that it carries our reflexes and our memory. Memory in all meanings of the term, meaning memory, our own memory, but also like, the memory of our body. Like we never need to tell our body when to grow hair or when puberty begins. Our body knows when to do that. So everything that's deep reflex and that memory of the body that belongs to the DNA, to the species, that's also part of kidney. And finally, what I want to explore a bit with you today, this, the taste that corresponds to kidney energy is salty, salt. So I'm going to stop here for just a moment and continue with that. So I would like to take a moment to ask you to just, how to say, to marvel at some of the things that are part of our universe and how little we really think about it. So salt, if we think about it, salt is really a miracle, right? It's present in nature. Some animals lick some rocks because there is salt in them. And of course, it's in the ocean. And, I love kids' questions, when they say, well, Mom, why is the ocean salty? And as we become adults, we forget about those questions where we marvel and we wonder why indeed is the ocean salty? And the salt of the ocean, we carry it. We are beings of the ocean. So our tears are salty. Our sweat is salty. Our blood is salty. So it's like, wow, why is that? So, and the importance of salt has always been recognized in old cultures. And it's always been part of exchanges. Actually, our word, salary, our salary is based on the word salt.
Mm.
Because during the Roman Empire, which is, the Latin root of the word, there was a time when soldiers were paid in salt. And because it was so important before the advent of electricity and fridges to keep food from going bad, and also because later they were given enough money to be able to buy salt. And during the Middle Ages, there was actually a tax on salt that contributed to the revolution in France, in a tax that was called gabelle, la gabelle, and very unpopular tax on salt. So, and again, for farmers, for people, for everybody, salt was very important because that was the means of preserving food. Just like when, when we preserve fruit, or we can still use salt, sugar is a different matter. And just as a little aside, I had a teacher whose name was Michio Kushi, and he used to say, jokingly, but not so jokingly, he said, if you can master salt and sugar, it is instant enlightenment. And because indeed, those are the two tastes that are highly addictive and that are the most difficult to balance. And in our bodies, their equilibrium, their balance is very important. So he used to say that. So salt, and we have many sayings, with a grain of, take something with a grain of salt. Of course, in the Bible, we have Jesus saying to his disciples to be the salt of the earth. And you can think maybe that it has to do not only with the importance of the salt, but also if it's a taste enhancer. And that's why we are so addicted to it too. And that's why restaurants use it so much, because it enhances taste, and also it preserves, and also it can hide. So for restaurants, it's helpful, like if something gets a bit spoiled, if you put a lot of salt, you're not going to taste it. So, right, that's the salt, the power of salt. And when I did ask myself that question, and it was actually not easy to find the answer. Why is the ocean salty? And then you can think that the kidney can be considered the ocean of our body. That's the same function. And of course, in our modern science, we know that kidneys regulate sodium and mineral content. So, there's a juncture between the two types of knowledge. But so I was wondering, why is the ocean salty, or what? And you don't really find much in terms of why. It's more of a description. So the why is a bit left up to us, because that equilibrium is so amazingly precise. So amazingly so. So one thing that happens is the salt adds density to the water, right? So that's why oceans don't evaporate as quickly as rivers, for example, because there's the density of salt. So it keeps the water. One of its function is to preserve water, to keep the water. So again, ocean tend not to flood nor to evaporate as fast as rivers. And so, you know, we're going to see if we think kidneys, ocean, it's the same function. That's why I always talk about ecology of our body. Another thing that's very important is that because there's a density of salt, it goes down, you know, and that the salt content plays a huge part in creating currents in the ocean, deep currents. So, for example, if the ocean was not salty like it is, we would not have the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream is really what gives Europe its temperature. I don't know about the US so much, how it's affected by the Gulf Stream, but I know that France in particular is very much affected by the Gulf Stream. So the temperatures would totally change. And that's why, you know, as part of the icebergs melting, when there is more soft water, the currents change, the density changes. So we don't know exactly what can happen. It could very well be that there is a first phase of real warming and a second phase of total freezing, because the ocean plays a big part. The way it is now plays a big part, and the salt content plays a big part in that equilibrium as well. So in our kidneys, salt plays a similar role. So it's called, I mean, it's sodium, but it's called sodium chloride. It's an electrolyte. So just like in the ocean, it plays a big part in the winds and the electricity of our body. So our nervous system, our immunity, basically it's like the kidney is seen as the root of our body. So all of our systems need that basic sodium, potassium balance that is achieved in the kidney for everything to work. So, for example, in Daoist medicine, we consider that as soon as a disease is chronic, there's a need to work on kidney energy. That it's part of it. It's really the basis, the root again. So it's a means of preservation. And so it preserves water, and same thing in us. So you can see that if we take too much salt, we can suffer from water retention. Or if the body cannot regulate the salt content anymore, there can be water retention. And you know, that's when if you push on a part of the body, the mark stays. So there can be edema, there can be too much, however, not enough, and there can be dehydration. And you will see that on my last slide, I'm going to show you a couple more slides. I come back to the theme that I had mentioned in the last talk we had together, which was sacred measure. And nothing is quite as true as with salt, meaning it's amazing. In a small quantity, you know, like for example, if people eat meat, they're going to tenderize the meat with salt to bring the liquids to the surface. So it's going to be moistening, and that's why also it preserves the water of the ocean. Okay, it has this hydrating aspect. However, if you leave the salt on the same piece of meat, well, it's going to dry it. It's going to take out all the water out of the meat. And, you know, when Indian tribes would travel, for example, they would carry dried goods. And so salt, of course, that's why it was so important for the Roman soldiers and why it was the root of salary, is that whenever you traveled, you needed to have dry food that you could rehydrate, and salt would do that. So, and in our body is the same. If we take too much salt, we become dehydrated. And in that case, there's no more water to balance the fire of the heart, which is our sun, which is, you know, something that could happen on the earth if our oceans become too polluted and cannot function, or then if they become too salty or not enough, then there is not that balance of cooling. An important function of the oceans is to cool the earth. Even when we have very hot weather, of course, the sea remains, especially in its depth, relatively cool. So, and in our body, it's the same, meaning that if we eat too much salt and become dehydrated, we become overheated. And there can be all kinds of fires, you know, all kinds of inflammations. One thing too that I remember with macrobiotic, in the movement of macrobiotics, I was part of it for a long time, and I still practice very much the principles of macrobiotic, but there has been a need for adjustment along the years. And one adjustment was that we inherited basically the macrobiotic diet at the beginning was basically the old style Japanese diet. And the people who brought it to the States or to Europe were Japanese. And Japanese people eat very, very salty. Okay. And I don't know if I could I'll show you with the slides in a moment. So they eat very salty. And for Europeans and Americans, it was too much. Our kidneys could not handle that much salt. And so the macrobiotic people at the beginning had a reputation for looking, I'm going to try to make it, we tended to be like pickles, you know. And one of the things that happens when you take too much salt is we become very irritable. We have little tolerance, you know, there's not much warmth. You become cold, basically. The kidneys are not, you know, are not hydrated, so they don't reflect the heart. We tend to become very intellectual, very cold, and very easy to irritate. And of course, if you look at the Japanese society, not to say that they're highly irritable, and that's not the point, and they do balance salt very well. And one thing that they have that we don't have is the bath, their bath. You know, I'm going to show you, actually, I'm going to show you now the slide I wanted to show. So here are some onsens or baths. Bath in Japan is really a ritual, you know, whether you go in a family or, and I don't know what it was like in the monastery for you, Tejo, but when I know that when I was in Japan, wherever I went, you know, I remember visiting some friends in the south of Japan, and they had a fantastic bath, and they would go outside to light a fire, a wood fire underneath the bath. And there are lots of onsens, you know, and they're very high baths, so you can actually be up to your neck in the home bath. You can sit in the bath. You don't need to lie down. You can actually sit in it. And then, you know, they have all the public baths. This is a public bath. And all the onsens in nature, whether it's in the mountains, whether it's by a river, and those baths, they're so darn hot. And I know I had a hard time with it, you know, and when the Japanese come out of those baths, they're all red, you know, red like lobsters. And for me, I could not stand it. I mean, I would, you know, stay a few minutes and I had to come out. And usually they like to come in and out, you know, of the bath or, you know, the onsen in nature. It's when it's just when it's snowing. I've been to some of these onsens in winter. It's fantastic. But even when it was snowing, I could only stay a few minutes in the bath and and so I, you know, the thing that I read and realized is that that's a way of managing salt. You know, they excrete the excess salt. And they've been doing that for generations, which, of course, at the beginning of macrobiotic, we had not. So we could not manage the salt the way they did. So we had to really to learn how to lower the salt. And of course, it created problems of hypertension and lots of disorders because of that. So always that question of sacred measure, how to balance the salt. One problem that we have too in our modern countries is that we do take way too much salt, whether we know it or not, or at least if we're not aware, because as soon as you buy anything that is packaged, anything that is prepared, it will be salty because that's what preserves the food. And so there's hidden sugar and there's also hidden salt. You know, you buy, and whether it's organic or not, anything that's prepared is going to have too much salt. So you go to a restaurant, there will be too much salt. So that doesn't mean it's not possible to do it or we shouldn't or it's bad, but it's something to be aware of. I know for myself, I have noticed that when I go eat at a restaurant, because I don't do it very often, I realize how thirsty I am afterwards. So that means if we do that, we need to be aware, drink more water afterwards, and make sure, like in the evening, if we've eaten at restaurant or the next day, we eat like more fruit or more non-prepared food. And I don't mean non-prepared at home, but nothing bought in a package, because that will be too salty. And the salt, the commercial salt that we buy is not like the salt in the ocean, unless it's a very good quality salt. So what we buy is actually sodium. And because all the minerals have been taken out of the salt. A good salt, like the salt that we get if we let some seawater evaporate is actually composed up to 70% of other minerals like magnesium, calcium, and but those minerals are used for industry. So, they're taken out of the salt. Same thing with the iodine that was taken out of the salt. And that's why there were so many problems with goiters that there was a need to put iodine again into the salt. However, it's not again the same content as in the ocean where everything is bound with minerals. A good natural source of salt, of course, is sea vegetables. And sea vegetables, because they also play a huge part in cleansing the ocean. They're the trees of the ocean. So they oxygenate the ocean. They provide chlorophyll. They detox the ocean. And that's why, for example, even right now to this day in Fukushima, where they're still cleansing, the waste from the nuclear plants, well, with all the technology that we have, they have not found any better way than dump it into the ocean, which is terrible. And we don't know at what point all of that is going to be too much and destroy that fragile equilibrium. But today, that's what they're doing, because we have not found anything better than salt and iodine to uh, to heal from radiation and also to destroy the radioactivity that comes from nuclear plants. So, and of course, sacred measure, at which point is that going to be too much? And the trees of the ocean, the salt of the ocean won't be able to do that anymore, is certainly a question. But right now, they are the kidneys of so they're able to transform and excrete. And our kidneys, to a great extent, they can take a certain amount of abuse, and they, through urination and through all the work they do in our body, the sweat, and we're going to be able to manage, but at some point it becomes too much. So the commercial salt is sodium, so it's very acidic, and it's not good for our kidneys. So that's one thing when our doctors say, people should eat a no salt diet. Well, there's a big debate about that. Is really no salt a good diet? And again, there's no differentiation in the medical world between what constitutes a good salt and what is a commercial salt, which is, the salt we buy in our supermarkets, the salt, unless we really pay attention to the kind of salt that we buy. And I know at Great Tree, there's a great salt from natural import that's really good. So a good salt actually is, you need to look for it because it's not popular. It's not popular because it won't go into, a salt shaker, because it's usually a little bit wet. So it's going to agglomerate, meaning that if you put good salt in a plastic bag, for example, after a while, you're going to have a bit of water at the bottom. Because again, it's wet. It should be a bit wet, and it contains minerals, so it's alkaline. So it's not sodium. like the regular salt that we buy. So for our kidney health, certainly one of the first things to do is to buy a good quality salt. The second principle is not to add salt to food once it's been cooked. And I remember something that stayed with me when I was in Japan. One day I was with some friends and we went to a good sushi restaurant, and they were, very happy to show me really a top of the line type of sushi restaurant. And of course we had the little container with shoyu, and the wasabi, the mustard, and all the ginger. And then we had our sushi, and so I picked up my sushi and I dropped it into the soy sauce. And you should have seen the horrified look on
Mm.
of my friend next to me. No, 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 don't do that. And he took it out, throw it away. And then he showed me, he picked up the sushi that the nori side had to touch the shoyu, but not the rice. Because he said if you put the rice, it's going to absorb the shoyu, the soy sauce, and it's going to be too salty. It's not delicate anymore. So you need just the nori side so that there's just a tiny bit of shoyu that touches and enhance the taste, but not overwhelm it. And of course, we Westerners have no idea about that. And again, I've seen so many horrified looks on my Japanese friends, to see people pouring soy sauce
Mm.
over their rice and like, oh. And of course, that's way too much. And so the Japanese, in their culture, they they have ways to handle their salt in the way they use it, in the rituals, in the bath. And of course, that might be disappearing too with the modern food, and Kentucky Fried Chicken and all of that, because that's always over salty. So a good quality salt, and just to enhance my teacher used to say, you should not taste the taste of salt. It should just enhance the taste of the food. When we are worried about hypertension or too much salt, one way also is to wash, some sea vegetable and to cook with a piece of sea vegetable, like a piece of kombu, to cook rice with a piece of kombu, or, so this way it's very light in salt. But again, one of my teachers said, it was a lady, Lima Osawa, and she used to say that she lived until 101. And she said that in her opinion, people could not heal without salt. That salt was necessary in small amount, but necessary to heal. So, and there are two schools of salt. Some people say, oh, there's enough salt in natural products. We don't need to add salt. And I'm not sure, what I think about that, and I leave it up to you to decide. For me, I think that that might have been true long, long time ago, and if people were harvesters and just eating food, nuts and so on, that they would pick. But it seems to me that as soon as we prepare food, and especially in our civilization right now, we do need some salt. And there were certainly certain times during the Middle Ages in France when people could not afford the tax on salt. And so some of them would go without salt for long, long time, and sometimes even a couple of generations because they were too poor. And there were really bad health problems. The bones would not grow right, kind of dwarfism and all kinds of problems. So, and if you think of animals who tend to look for rocks that have salt and lick it, it seems that even they know that we need some salt. And sea vegetables, for example, that are so well liked in Asia are salty. And salty is the taste of the kidney. So I do use salt, and for me, just like for everybody, it's always a question of finding the balance. And same with Japanese products, miso and tamari. Again, I can talk about macrobiotic beginnings where we overused so much of the miso and the shoyu and again, pouring it on our rice and all of that, all the things that are not so good to do. So, meaning that in the Daoist tradition, salty being the taste of the kidney, we can have a little more salt in the winter because it's going to help hydration. And if you think of it, the best water for rivers is actually the water they get in the winter. It's not the summer storms that provide the bulk of the water. Is from the mountains, the snows in the mountains, the snow that will melt slowly and really go deep into the soil. So the water tables are regenerated during winter. And think of it also, it's the night, so it's a time of rest. So ideally, we should replenish our water tables in winter, make sure we are hydrated, but of course not with a lot of cold water, but more like with soups and herbal teas and some salt. So my teacher, Michio Kushi, used to say, your miso soup should be your ocean. It replicates the ocean. So you have a little bit of seaweed, and again, not a ton of seaweed. You say you don't need to have a bowl full of seaweed, just a few pieces. And the miso, not too strong, but the miso. And then, you can put a little bit of grain over it, which is traditional in Japan, and that will help kidney health and replicate the ocean environment. So let me see what I wanted to. So what kind of salt? I wanted to talk about that for a moment. So, like I know a salt that has become popular in the US is Himalayan salt because we'll say there are mostly two kinds of salt. There's mine salt and there's ocean salt. So one day I was curious about Himalayan salt. I was buying it, and where I worked, the doctor thought it was the best salt. He recommended it to everybody. So I followed that for a while. And then one day I thought, well, I'd like to see exactly what does it mean. So his point was that the oceans are polluted, and so the mine salt is less polluted and is of better quality. And so I followed that reasoning for a while. And then when I went online to check, really Himalayan salt, first of all, much of Himalayan salt does not come from the Himalayas. And you see that mining of salt is a huge industrial operation. And you see working in the mines is a very difficult work and job. And actually, I know that in the 17th and 18th century, um, prisoners were sent to work in salt mines, because it was such difficult work. And of course, even today, I checked again online, there have been accidents in salt mines recently, in 2024, in 2023, and there are some that make the news because, it's a catastrophe. And then afterwards, either mine pits remain open or they have to flood the salt mines. So, and I saw that, I saw some slides also where it showed children working in the mines. And I thought, wow, that doesn't resonate with me. Plus, I know that Himalayan salt is devoid of iodine. So an iodine is important, all right? So not all mine salt is devoid of iodine, but many of them. And so for all these reasons, I thought, I don't know, that doesn't speak to me. And so here is sea salt harvesting. Now, we're not going to idealize it and say that it's not hard work, but like I've seen sea salt harvesting in Brittany. People are outside. Here is, some pictures of that. And yes, you have to carry it. It is hard work, definitely. But I feel more at ease personally with that kind of harvesting, and it speaks to me more than the mining and the destruction of the environment. So again, and you have to look for good quality sea salt because much of what is sold as sea salt is not very good quality. The good sea salt, they check, first of all, in terms of pollution, and they tell you about its origin. So I know that the salt that Tejo uses at Great Tree, if you go on the site of Natural Imports, they tell you about the salt, where they get it and how. And indeed, good salts, people are very proud. Salary, salt, the salt of the earth, they know the value. And there have been in macrobiotic circle, there have for as long as I went to conferences, there were debates about salt. The best salt should be white, because white, of course, can be done chemically, and that's not what we want. But here you see, this salt is good quality and naturally white. So some thought that it should be a bit gray. There has always been debate, and that shows the importance of salt. So I talked about the Japanese. So in the end, when we talk about salt, what I'm left with when I go on this topic to realize that, number one, it is a challenge to find the good measure, the blessed measure for each one of us. And more, when I think about this blessed measure, I think that the middle way of Buddhism really means more than just, not too ascetic and not too loose. Yes, but it's such a basic principle of life. And if you look at the ocean, actually, here too, the blessed measure is where it is now, and there's not much leeway in terms of how far it can go. The most that, we've seen the Dead Sea, for example, and in the Dead Sea, there's no life. All right, so it's an example of what happens when, and there are conditions for the Dead Sea because it cannot escape. It's surrounded by earth. There are different explanations for that, but that's an example of what happens with too much salt. And of course, kidney diseases are, the doctors are saying that's probably the disease that's increasing the most, including with diabetes, because at the end, diabetes, dialysis, it affects the kidney. So we have to find the blessed measure for us, for our environment. And I think being like kids, marvel at what it takes to, sometimes we're so automatic, and the same, we take something on the shelf and, it's that interdependence that is at the center of Buddhism. We forget how much work, how much, or the prayers that we do at the beginning of the meal, where we can remind ourselves. And the salt is really an amazing story for earthlings, how it contributes to our life, to our blood, to the ocean, and we are the children of the ocean. So that's what I wanted to share with you today, that reflection upon salt and how to find the blessed measure for each one of us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank
We're
you.
almost right at 11 o'clock, so I think we'll just have announcements.
Yes, there's a lot of stuff going on in the next couple weeks. There's a family meditation tomorrow. Next weekend, Chimio is speaking again, so I'm very excited to hear that. She hasn't given a title to her lecture, but
Yeah, path.
Path is the title of her lecture. So that's next Saturday. And the Saturday after that, Genjo's going to be here. Genjo's going to be back in person. So we're very excited, a star-studded cast for the next couple of weeks. There's also a mini practice period that's starting next Sunday, which involves studying Pema Chodron's book, How We Live is How We Die. So if you're interested in that, you're going to need to catch up on the book because they'll be starting at chapter 12 of that book. And then email me if you are interested in participating. So that's info@greattreetemple.org. What else? Oh, the Nehan Session is starting February 14th. So if you want to participate in the Nehan Session, register soon.
Nehan means nirvana.
Oh.
It's celebrating Buddha's nirvana.
Right.
Buddha's death and nirvana.
Right, so that's what we have going on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk today, Myoren.
Thank you,
Really,
Liliane.
really helpful. Yeah, really great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
One more thing, we have a new website up now, and if you want to find particular lectures by people like Myoren, just go to the archive, and the drop down is past lectures or something.
Past speakers.
Past speakers, and it will take you to a page with pictures of the past speakers. So you can click on their picture and find their talks.
High tech.
High tech.
Patrick, the webmaster did, but we
yeah.
both.
Patrick, our webmaster is a brilliant webmaster. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.